Done.
All right.
All right. Hi, Kate. Cool to meet you. Cool to hear from you. What is up? How did you find me? What's your do you recall?
I don't know how I found you. I think I remember the first post of yours that I saw that made me follow you though was you posted your meme graph of like all the sections and stuff. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but there's something going on there and I like it.
That's so
because
cool.
it was like and
that
I just
graph,
like messy connected. So
that graph has really punched above its weight in terms of the amount of time I put into it versus like the number of people. I get like a DM about it at
is
least
that a common
once a
response?
week. I mean, so about once a week, people ask me, "Hey, what's that in your header? Can I see it?" And you know, like I always just send them the link, but like sometimes that develops into an interesting conversation, and it's amazing how. I mean, so the stuff in that graph, I'll post a link to it. It is a kind of culmination of like me trying to summarize many years of journaling. So if I say like, oh, it took me a few minutes, that's like not entirely accurate. It took me a few minutes to write it down, but like it's like several years of journaling. But it's amazing how you do something like that and it just starts creating opportunity for you in a sense. Like it's like a wingman out in the world.
Yeah, it's just something to be said for like putting everything out there all together and like like everything that you could think of that you're going to be tweeting about or whatever. But probably why it's so useful because it gives a broad overview of like everything that you like to talk about.
Yeah. And, you know, so when you then added me, like the first thing I do with when someone adds me or someone follows me or reaches out to me is, okay, I look at their bio and one of my favorite things when I see a person's bio is that I see that they have a personal website. And then I go to your personal website and I'm like, oh, there's an open questions page. And like you have a list of all the things that you're curious about. That like to me, anybody who does that, I instantly feel like, oh, we are friends. Like we have this. Like you're one of me. You know, I wonder, I've been trying to understand how that is or why that is. It's kind of like it's almost like a secret handshake. And it's not even secret, it's in the open, right? But it's like I guess it's a sign that a person has, well, first of all, having a personal website, it's like you have a commitment to like you want to have a space on the web that persists, that is kind of that you're like your own junkyard playground. Yeah, so that's a nice sign because I mean it's not that people who don't have that can't be fun and interesting and all that stuff, but it's nice to know that if that person has a website, they probably want to still be doing this a few years from now, and it's cool to have. I really like long-term conversation partners. Then you can check in on them like 2 years later and like, hey, like what are you thinking about these days? And they're like, oh, I used to think that, but now I think this. It's super fun.
Yeah, and I think the thing with like questions is that, or when I see somebody being curious and asking questions and stuff on Twitter or whatever, I'm more inclined to follow them because it's more of an admission that you don't know something and that you're wanting to learn it. And that your voice is probably going to change and you're going to be a much more like dynamic and interesting person to follow. Than if you're just like, here's what I know and that's it.
An interesting. So I used to sometimes get comments from people that were like, oh, you know, like how dare, I mean, yeah, like some percentage will be like, how dare you post stuff with such you know, like assertion. like I sometimes I get that, like it's pretty rare, like 1% or less, but it gets to me every time, or it used to get to me worse than it does now. Like somebody will be like, you know, who are you to say these things? Like, what do you know? And I would agonize about it a bit, like, yeah, what do I know? I don't like, you know. But having reflected on it more and having spoken to people about it, I realized that the kind of confusion, or like there's like a worldview difference that confuses people, which is some people think that you have to be an authority to say anything in public because you're like even asking questions or whatever is like to like a pretty small subset of people. I think they feel like anything that's in public that's published must be authoritative, and whereas I feel like I am not an authority on anything, and I'm just a curious person trying to figure stuff out, and I don't know what I know until I've had a chance to like tentatively say out loud what I think I know, and then other people will be like, hey, no, but what about this, what about that? And I'm like, oh yeah, shit, I didn't consider that. And I would not have been able to kind of like stress test those thoughts and ideas inside my own head, because I don't know what I don't know. I don't know what my assumptions are. So I have to say things. So in fact, I'm not saying things because I think I'm so great. I'm saying things because I don't know what I don't know and I want to learn, right?
Right. And sometimes the best way to like figure out what you don't know is to just put it out there and see like angry people come out and be like, well, what about this?
Yeah, and hopefully they approach it with a kind of cheerful, playful, supportive, and like you can disagree in a fun and nourishing way, and that's always cool. Some like, yeah, have you considered this? What about that? And yeah, I've learned so much from strangers talking to me about stuff that I've posted, which is insane, and it made me realize that for a lot of people who are, you know, like extremely, like people in very visible positions who seem kind of like, how are they so smart? How do they know so much? They seem like really stratospheric. And like some amount of it is like is like natural intelligence or whatever. But people seem to often underestimate, like when you are in that kind of position, people come to you with information all the time. Like people will send you relevant things. And you know, there's this cool example I retweeted where I think I can't remember who. It might have been Naval, where someone said, "Oh, this is what I know," and then like, but I don't understand this thing. And then like an expert in that field, like a scientist, replied with, "Hey, you said you don't know this. Actually, I did a paper on this and this." And it's like there's no way he would have been able to get that by like googling it. It's like too obscure. But it's like tailor-made perfectly to fill that hole of curiosity that was designed there. And like when that happens to you on a regular basis, like it accelerates your learning, which is mind-blowing to me.
Yeah, I think in a way that's what I'm trying to do. So my, you know, website and Twitter and everything is relatively new. And I just thought I'd give it a try to try and figure out if it'll help me make a mental model of the world and understand the world with like blatant holes for what I don't know that I can hopefully fill in.
Right.
Because I just feel like I'm always confused and I would like to stop being confused. So
I just saw your Twitter header image of confused. There's this yeah. I have a similar Facebook cover photo from the movie. What's the movie? The Terminal, where Tom Hanks plays this character who's like from a foreign country. I think like an Eastern European country or something, and he has this look that says he says, no, I'm confused about everything. Like somebody says, are you confused about this? And then he says, no, I'm confused about everything, which is I just thought that was a fun enough position to be worth kind of putting up that way. Okay, I'm going to scroll through your open questions and I'm going to look for what I think is my favorite question. So there's physics stuff, there's consciousness stuff, there's emotion stuff, gender stuff, randomness, civilization. What constitutes a single person? I mean, I'm curious do you have, would you say that any one of these questions stands out to you more than the rest? Or is it like all, how do you kind of traverse your curiosity landscape? Is that a metaphor that you kind of, that makes sense to you? Well, that's how I think about it. I think about like my brain is like a city, or like a, not even a landscape, and then there are like cities here and there of stuff that I kind of know better, and then there's like this wilderness in between. And
I think that's a good way to think about it. I don't know if I have that offhand. I think honestly with this page, I just kind of posted them all that I could think of, and there's probably a lot that are missing as well. And it's also probably a lot of what I've been reading and thinking about. And recently that's been a lot about evolution. Because basically I think actually we can start from the bottom, because this last one that I put on there, what order should you learn subject in order to make the world make the most sense? And I feel like recently learning about, well, computation is one of those things that made everything kind of click for me.
Computation, and then, right?
Yeah, and then evolution is the secondary one, and it's kind of one of those things that I'm like, I can't believe I didn't really know this or think about this before, because it just kind of puts everything in a certain perspective. And then I think I want to be able to learn those kinds of topics that are kind of so shifting first, and then I fill in things after that. And that might be an unrealistic way to approach it. But that's kind of the goal.
Yeah, I mean, so my frame is kind of like I have a very curiosity first principle, which is like which means that so there may be some general order that probably works for most people most of the time, maybe. But like I honestly believe that if there's anything that you are unusually or particularly curious about, it makes sense to focus on that first. And I'll explain why. It's like I mean, okay, to kind of contextualize that a little bit or to give backstory first, I do remember when I was about 20, I had a phase where so uh I was just done with school, which I was not a fan of. And then I had like mandatory military service for a couple of years, so I had a lot of free time to do whatever I wanted, like in the evenings and stuff. And so I wanted to give myself a proper education, like I was inspired by all these like old school polymaths from hundreds of years ago, and was like, how do I be my version of that? Like how do I learn, like synthesize all knowledge? What should I learn? Should I learn like physics and philosophy? And I did try. I saw like in Singapore every year there's this National Library book sale where you get to buy old like decommissioned books for $2 per book, and I would bring like my duffel bag and like fill the whole bag with books and spend all my money and buy like I think I bought like a couple of hundred books, and I still have a couple of those books left, and it's all like very. It's interesting to look at it now because it's very grand. There's a lot of like like theory of nations, or like the origins of consciousness, or they're kind of very grand big picture things, and these were things that I wanted to know. But I also found that for me personally, like, so I did read a bunch of them and I did get a bunch of value out of them, and I'm glad I did. But also looking back, it's kind of amusing to me how broad those things were and how they weren't directly applicable to me in some ways. I mean, I'm conflicted about it. It's like I wouldn't tell anyone that they should or shouldn't do that. But that's what's interesting, I guess, is how my own method has evolved. So it used to be like that, and so what happened was I kind of pick up a bunch of factoids and theories and stories and snippets of like all these big picture things. But at the time I feel like my knowledge was not yet kind of it still felt like a, a bit distant from me. Like there's me and then there's the stuff that I know, and it didn't feel kind of really, I didn't feel like I had a fingertip feel of it. And since then, and I can't really pinpoint when exactly this happened, but like now, for example, I have this thread on Twitter where what I do is I have 100. I'm trying to make a list of 100 household objects, and so for example, one of the objects was like a packet of chili sauce from McDonald's, and the idea behind that was that okay, all of these objects are in my life, so they have significance to me in some way because they are in my life. I can look at it, I can pick it up, I can touch it, and like and another one was like lighters, like a cigarette lighter, and so I would make a list of all these objects, and then I would research each of these objects, as like I would try and ask questions like how do we get the a packet of chili sauce, like where did it come from, like why is it right now it's on my desk, right? Okay, but what is the long chain of things that has brought chili sauce here? Like so there's what is chili, there's what is chili sauce, there's what is packaging, how like so and I end up reading up about like who was the first person to make a packet of chili sauce, who was the first person who bottled chili, where is chili from, it's from Mexico, what's the difference between a chili and a pepper. And then next thing I know, I'm like reading about like Mexican history and like trade routes that bring chili across. And the interesting thing about that for me is that so a bunch of it seems like random information, but it has this much more intimate fit on. So I now feel like I have more of an emotional connection with like Mexican chili history. And then there's like when they started bottling those chili sauces the first time, there was like this interesting whole like side plot about how just the business practices in the US about advertising and bottling and industrial processes. And it's just, I find that now when I do this, it's so fun that it has changed, it has influenced now the way I approach thinking about even really big picture things that I was like trying to learn earlier on. So I guess what I'm getting at is that, yeah, earlier on, I think I was trying to learn, I was still kind of role playing my model of like what I felt an academic should be, which was kind of like, oh, you should find the most authoritative source, like a big tome, and you should read like Origin of Species, or like this. I mean, which you can do, is there's no reason why you shouldn't. But now I enjoy things like, if I'm gonna learn about evolution, like I start looking up about like what kind of place did Charles Darwin live, why did he go on the expedition, what's his relationship with his family. And I find, I guess it's a human interest angle, kind of like I try to make sense of bigger things through the lens of like individuals who go through it. That's a long rambly rant.
That's really interesting. I think I've always I think my natural first interest is like the super kind of theoretical stuff that doesn't really have application into everyday life. Like I think that just naturally where I gear towards. But like you said, sometimes it can get a little bit too meta if you think about that stuff for too long, and if you're always thinking about, what is actually going on, what is time, what is this, what is that. And I think definitely need to have like grounding influences on my life as well to bring me back and be like, okay, but you're also a human living a life, and these are the things that humans should appreciate, and you should just do because you want to, and not because that's exactly the right reason to do it or whatever. It doesn't have to be this I don't know, grand thing leading up to it. You can just kind of live a simple human life. And I really like that aspect of it too. I think that is like a lot of what it should be. And so I think where I'm trying to go with this is that I think there's a lot of things that I should understand that I don't, with regard to like the big topics. And I feel like it's actually doable to understand that maybe within a couple of years. At least get my bearings.
Right.
And then after that, let that guide me to what other topics in human history and stuff I think would be interesting and things like that. And so I've got a bit of a roadmap in my head about like what is going on, but then there's always these little side interests that come out when I'm like to help ground me, I think, and not get too up in the clouds about it.
It's and it doesn't, I think so often when I see people like have arguments about this sort of thing, it tends to always get framed as some kind of dichotomy. So it'll be like, oh, theory and practice, that kind of thing, or like just applied and theory.
In my thing, actually. Where does the difference between theory and the real world come in? Why can't we have theories that account for the X and the Y's? Shouldn't our best theories be practical?
Right. That's great actually. So when does the difference? It's almost, it makes me sad actually to see people get very hung up on that stuff. And I think it gets political actually. Like it's because and one of the things that I care about a lot personally is community management. Like just you can think of it as like the art or the science of community, right? So it could be how people gather in small groups, in how how does a dinner party work, all the way up to how does society work. Society might be a little bit too big for like my immediate personal interests, but how do you run a forum, or how do you run a co-working space, or just how do you bring people together and have them be productive and in a way that is engaging and supportive, that doesn't end up going to shit, because it very often does go to shit. Like, so when it does go to shit, why does it go to shit? Like there are patterns that you can study, and there are very elaborate social theories and many different schools of thought, and like how what are the models that you use for trying to model human behavior. And there's also there's like principle. So there's like, Karl Popper had this principle of intolerance, which is that, you should tolerate anything except intolerance. And then people argue about what that really means. And so those arguments can be kind of interesting, but like, as somebody who has actually managed, group chats and Facebook groups and stuff, like, it becomes very obvious to me once you have a little bit of practice, like, where the limits of the theory are, in the sense that, so like the classic example for me is kind of like, you have a group chat, let's say there's like 10 people and somebody else joins, and somebody is just kind of insufferable and making everybody else feel uncomfortable, and like the chat is starting to die a little bit. And then, you as the moderator or whoever
not with respect to intolerance.
Say again?
Like, so are you talking about with that Karl Popper statement, if they're being intolerant, or if they're just being kind of otherwise insufferable?
Yeah, I mean, so let's say it's not clear. So in practice, that's how it is, right? It's like you can't. It's not. So if they were obviously just being like this vindictive, cruel, selfish person, like, it's very easy to either you just tell them to get out, or you have an intervention. But like, it gets murky when it's in the middle. Like, it's like, and it just takes, for me, it takes experience. Like, you do it a few times and you realize that, and you get to decide. I think very often people who are very into theory, there's often this element of not wanting to, it's almost like I'm the person doing the theory, and then there's like the thing that you're theorizing about is like the experiment, and you don't want to intervene in the experiment. That's like cheating, or you're spoiling the experiment or whatever. Like, you're supposed to keep your hands clean, which I sympathize with. But so so I guess the interesting thing is, in my experience, in practice, everything becomes like, what you get to decide what your values are in the practice of doing it. And it's also like a storytelling principle, like in whether they're talking about like novels or movies or whatever. Like, a character only gets to be as interesting as the choices they make. And you make a character more interesting by putting them in a difficult scenario where they have to make a difficult choice where neither of the choices are great. And then, like, they may not have known who they are until after they make the choice, or like they might not have realized that they would make the call, the sacrifice something or whatever it is. And I don't know if I'm going off topic, but like, it's a,
but no, I kind of like get where you're going.
There's a practitioner, I guess. So very often, like, theory gets to be beautiful on retrospect, but in practice, like, you have imperfect information and you have to make decisions with imperfect information. And I guess you can kind of have a theory of how to make decisions with imperfect information. I'm sure there is.
I guess that's like, what I'm getting at a bit more, is that I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there shouldn't be a difference between like what our theories can do and what is in real life. Like, I feel like they should be getting at the same things. And like, there's just something that all of these things that when people are like, oh, that's just a theory, it doesn't account for like the real world, or like it's not practical. I always wonder what that actually means. Like, where does the noise come from? Is it from human subjectivity? Is it from like classical chaos, where like little, random things could have big effects that aren't measured? Like, I don't, yeah, I think that's just the part that confuses me a bit. Is so, like, why
I think you're pretty close to it already. It's like, I mean, which isn't to say that I figured it out, but like, I maybe have a little bit more experience, but I don't know if I figured it out, but or have gotten any closer to figuring it out. But it seems to me that, so one thing is kind of cascading effects can spiral out of control really fast. So like, like, just imagine you have a theory of like classroom management, right? And then the theory goes like 1 or 2 layers deep on, if there's an unruly child in your classroom, you should do X. But then, like, while you're trying to think about what to do with X, like, that kid has just convinced like 3 other kids to do something crazy, and then now the whole, like, they're mutinying against you, and you don't have a theory for how to deal with the mutiny, like, because the theory can't keep up with how quickly a situation can evolve on the spot. right? So
Right.
that's that.
So
Yeah, I think
I think it's from the limitations then of human capacity for like understanding. Like if you had a magic oracle that could understand, everything, and obviously there wouldn't be.
hypothetically, I do wonder though. So there is this I can't remember the specifics now, but there was a thought experiment I once read about, something to do with Maxwell's demon. Are you familiar with Maxwell's demon? You should be, I
I'm
imagine.
not sure.
You're not? So Maxwell's demon is, this is exciting for you. Maxwell's demon is this idea of, basically, if you could have like a tiny super intelligent creature that could somehow um, basically reverse entropy, like basically, kind of like can you unscramble an egg, basically, or can you, like, so the general thing is like things descend from order to chaos, and like it's harder to, like, you can set something on fire and it becomes ashes, but turning it from ashes back to whatever it was before seems way much more difficult because of like whatever. And Maxwell's demon is like a thought experiment of, well, what if there was some kind of like mystical magical creature, or just how, like a super small like, so the thought experiment simplifies it down to kind of like, instead of unscrambling an egg or unburning a thing, it's like, okay, why don't we just simplify it to, there's like 2 bits of noise and there's like 1 bit of, they kind of like, as simple as it possibly could be. Like, could the demon know how to reverse a seemingly irreversible thing at the smallest possible level? And so again, theoretically, but that intelligence would have to be stored somewhere, somehow. Like, so whether it's a script, or whether it's I don't know how, I can't remember the specifics of how you would do it, but like, it's just something intelligent enough to make that change would itself have some resource requirement. Like, it's a non-zero resource requirement. We don't know how small it could be, but no matter how small the resource requirement is, like, it's non-zero. And then the thing that you're trying to change is from like 0 to 1, I guess. And like you have to look it up. I'm not doing it justice at all, but like, if you look it up, it's like, some people say that, it's almost like, if you can solve for Maxwell's demon, it's like you're solving for entropy. Like, you can turn it makes it decisively possible that you should definitely be able to kind of like prevent stars from dying and stuff like that. Which again, I'm not doing it justice, because
it sounds like exactly the kind of thing I would be interested in. And a bit about what I just read David Deutsch's Fabric of Reality, and a little bit of what he's saying, that the purpose of life, which equals knowledge, is it's like, if that effect could grow in such a way to counteract the like dispersing randomness. And that's like the omega point theory of what could happen at the end of the universe. To like, it's so basically like, life is the structure to the chaos. And it does have the power, in at least small ways right now, to act in ways that are like reverse to like just entropy going out.
Right.
If you even think about like purpose, or like life in general, then you can think about it reversing cause and effect in a way. In that, like, usually, like, if you have a purpose and I'm doing something, and I'm doing something to achieve some purpose, and I'm making these actions, then if you want to ask, why are these actions happening, you have to allude to that thing that's in the future. But you're saying it's happening for this purpose that's in the future. The cause is after the effect. And so it kind of can reverse that at least on a logical level, in a way, which I think is a really interesting thing to think about.
And what's amazing to me is how your experience of these thinking about these things can be very abstract, but it can have a very real impact on your emotions, like the way you relate to your life. And it can be a bit of an info hazard, like if you are discussing things with people who might not be ready to hear certain things. So like for me, I remember when I was young, I used to be very much in love with the idea of having a legacy as a way of achieving immortality. Like, if you like okay, we're probably gonna die. Statistically, most people have died, right? And it might be cool if we can be the first people in the history of humanity to fix aging and reverse death. And there are people, I know people who are like actively working on it, which is cool. But like I don't feel kind of
also imagine being the last person to die though in that
yeah,
scenario. You just
right,
that would
yeah, like
be the worst.
you'd be like kind of mad. You'd be like, screw you guys. But yeah, I so for me, I've kind of, and it's interesting because different people will have different answers to what they think their relationship with death is. And so some people have a religious belief which is like, oh, the body dies but then there's some afterlife, and some people genuinely believe that, and they find some kind of comfort or solace in that. Maybe some people decide that they want to be like completely cool with the idea of just eventually not existing. Some people, and there's just like so many, like that's the discussion about life, about dealing with death is like a multiple, you could write books and books about it, right? So it's a very, very big thing to talk about. But like to try and condense it, so I used to think that, okay, I'm cool with the idea of, as long as I have a legacy, as long as like I create something that endures beyond me, like that's how I choose to strategize my life. Like I'm living like to win the game of life in as I'm conceiving of it. So it's not a competition, but the way to live a good life in my head back then was I should leave a good legacy. And I found myself being directed by that belief. It's kind of wild to look back and realize that I had a belief, and that belief influenced my behavior. And so like I would do things like, my friends would invite me to go to a party or something. I'm like, no, I have to blog, I have to work on my legacy. Yeah, I might not explicitly say that, but like that is what I'm thinking in my head. And um which isn't to say that either of those things is right or wrong. I don't think I was necessarily wrong for thinking that, or right for thinking that, or that my friends were wrong. But I think you have to kind of come to terms. So anyway, so that was going on and that was before I feel like I internalized the concept of the heat death of the universe. So like before, and it's also in poetry, right? Like Ozymandias is about this poem where there was once a grand king of kings with a massive statue, and then like now it's all just sand, right? So everything, so that's like a metaphor for like the eventual heat death of the universe, which is like, okay, like most people will not be remembered a couple of generations after they die, and eventually the universe, like, so its best theory seem to suggest that unless we figure out how to reverse entropy, which seems about as likely as anti-aging or reversing death, then even people with legacies, even like the most famous or most important people you can think of, like eventually it's all tracings in the sand, and eventually it'll all kind of wash out. Like when I first realized that, it conflicted, so it punched through my belief of I should have a legacy so painfully. And I just sat there, I was like, like I think for probably a week I was just like, what am I doing in my life? But then eventually it comes around. And so the analogy I like is kind of the sandcast, like, so so you have all of existence, or you have all of your life, and you can kind of like use a metaphor. So I imagine your whole life is actually just one day at the beach, and you can do whatever you want at the day at the beach. And you can just relax and do nothing and kind of enjoy the sun, or you can walk around and make friends with other people, or you can build a sandcastle that may or may not, so probably won't survive. But so you have to, I mean, what that kind of got me to do was, it made me realize the importance of enjoying yourself in the process. So it's right. I still care about having a legacy to some degree, but like I realized that, and it's the wild thing is, it's purely conjecture, it's purely hypothetical, right? So it's because even previously, like if I die, whatever, I mean, like after my death, I would not be around to enjoy the benefits of the legacy or whatever. But somehow realizing that the legacy is not permanent made me realize that, oh, okay, then now the cost benefit analysis changes a little bit. Like it's no longer, it used to be, I used to think that it's worth suffering your whole life miserably if you build a great legacy. But now I'm like, is it though? So it's like, yeah, right. So it's like you a good legacy is a nice gift that you can give the world, but like you shouldn't be miserable while you're doing it. And so that's kind of like how my current thinking has evolved.
Right.
But like, is it conceivable that maybe in the next decade or so, like I might come around to thinking that, like, so okay, even though a legacy is not permanent, maybe the fact that it could last a couple of 100 years and could make a material difference to people that I care about, like that might be worth doing. And then that belief would then reshape my experience of the work that I'm doing day to day. So I wouldn't be miserable. I would be doing work that feels meaningful and important. But then, like, are you bullshitting yourself, right? So there's that thing. So I think like my big takeaway from all of it is kind of just you have to investigate your beliefs, and you have to ask yourself, would you do things differently if you were wrong about certain things, and just what your priorities really are and what you really want. And I think the cool thing that has happened for me was back when I used to be obsessive about the legacy thing, I don't think I was as fun to be with. I think I was a bit like what's the way of putting it? I was just kind of humourless, I guess. I was like, I have no time for frivolous shit. Like I have my legacy to worry about. And now I'm like, yeah, sure. Like I do care about the legacy, but like I want each moment to be precious while it exists, while it's there, right? Like I don't wanna, like if I'm working on a book, I wanna enjoy working on the book as well as publishing it. I don't wanna like hate myself while I'm doing it. Because you could always,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think I totally agree that like these big things that are seemingly like so detached from everyday life can actually have such an impact on like the general frame. And that's a bit of why I'm trying to understand them a bit better and then understand like what I actually believe as like a foundation with which to like then act upon. But I agree that like regardless of what happens, the life is probably going to be insignificant on some scale. Like one life is going to be insignificant on one scale. And so the only scale that it's not insignificant on is the scale of like the one that's experiencing it and others that are experiencing it that like, or that are affected by it. So I guess both of those things can be condensed into experience and how you are around people and legacy all at once. And like the effect that you have on other conscious beings. And I think that's why I'm so interested in like, what is consciousness and where does it come from? And what is time? Does it end? Or is it kind of just playing on a loop and things like that? Because that does in a way inform how you can act within that or how you should act within that.
That's true. That is true. Yeah. Yeah.
And so, yeah. And I think it's a bit unreasonable to expect to figure out everything before you can like then have your ethical code or whatever it is, or of how you're living your life.
Right.
But I think plug in my laptop here. I think that it's at least worthwhile to kind of get on a broad level what's going on.
Yeah, it's like it's actually, it echoes with the theory and practice thing again, where it's good to have as much good theory as you can, but you also kind of have to practice living your life while you are alive, because you're never going to be able to come up with the perfect, like it would be a shame if you came up with the perfect theory for living like on your deathbed, right? Like you just spend your whole life, like it's better to have a good enough theory, right? Like, oh, I figured it out, like shit. Yeah, so you kind of have to juggle both things, and I think that tension is what, like, so some people get frustrated by that tension, which is tragic, I think, because I think that the correct the tension of what? Just the tension between like knowing and experiencing, kind of, or like there's this poem that I like by Nisri Gata, I think that's his name, where he says, knowledge tells me that I am nothing. Wisdom tells me, knowledge or wisdom tells me that I'm nothing. Love tells me that I'm everything. And like between these two banks flows the river of my life. which is kind of, and what I like about that is this idea that the tension between the two ideas, like, oh, I'm the whole, like, I am the whole universe experiencing itself, I'm everything, and the other one is like, oh, everything is just atoms, and like there's a tension between those perspectives, and some people feel like one must be right or one must be wrong, but it could also be that both are kind of true to different degrees, and you may never completely figure it out, but like the conversation between the two, and like this push and pull, the stretch, that's what creates interesting things. And if you
I would everything that life is the tension between those things.
Yeah, like you could say that living itself is tension, right? And like when you die, the tension is released in a sense, right? In terms of like, so you are as the membrane of order against chaos is tension, right? And so it's like it's funny, it's amazing how that simple metaphor of kind of healthy versus unhealthy tension, like you can use it in so many contexts. You can use it when I was just about to think about product development, like when you're trying to, or even just writing a book, of communicating or shipping anything. And also like your health, like like too much tension is like anxiety and stress, and you get health problems from that. But like if you have no tension whatsoever, well, in modern civilization, you're not going to get eaten by a lion or something, but there's just that kind of balancing, which is like, and then you're like, oh, that's what like the Taoist symbol of yin yang, like that's what it's about. It's like it's about a beautiful tension. And then you start seeing all these motives everywhere, and you're like, oh fuck, like people have been thinking about these things for a very long time, and we're kind of relearning it every generation. And I wonder if it's possible for us to kind of accelerate that because of media technology,
or persist it, or persist the knowledge in a better way through generations.
I think it's possible.
No,
I think we are living in a so one of my favorite essay of all time was written in 2011. It's about technology. It's by this, it was in the New Yorker. It's called The Information, and it's this very nice meta, so it's like a it's a meta essay about all the other essays throughout history about, is technology good or bad? Is it gonna liberate us, or is it our damnation? Is it like, there's ways in which tech has freed us, and then there's ways in which tech enslaves us. And then he just kind of like, he really artfully kind of lays out the recurring motifs in all of these different things that when like the printing press came out, that was like great for education but also great for propaganda. And then it's like there's this great war going on sort of like for millennia. And what I really liked about that essay was I felt that when you read it, you get a sense of like, I guess, meta perspective of like, so you see the struggle happening in whatever, and you realize that you have seen multiple versions of multiple struggles happening on multiple fronts, which can be stressful, kind of like you just see like everywhere you look, people are arguing about things, right? Like just, and you zoom out and you see that it's kind of a great conversation, a great negotiation about like what is appropriate, what is healthy, what is, just like how. And in my lifetime, for example, so I'm 30 this year. Like when I was a child, like online dating did not exist. Like nobody, there was no Tinder, there was no nothing. And so it came about in my lifetime, and I've witnessed, so there's people posting things like, oh, this person ghosted me, it's inappropriate, and then somebody else, oh, that's fine, it's almost more respectful than if they go to, and different people have different perspectives, and it can get frustrating to sit in the middle and witness everyone kind of arguing over you. But if you zoom out and you take a big picture perspective, you realize that this is how people collectively figure out like norms, like what is right and all that.
Exactly, it's a process of evolution in itself.
Yeah. And when once you can see that, you can kind of not, you can kind of allow it to happen without stressing out yourself. And I think that's necessary. I think I think I think what happens with a lot of people when they're trying to figure stuff out is that they eventually encounter some difficult problem, or they eventually encounter some just something that like you're trying to imagine you're trying to help resolve I don't know, world hunger, right? Let's say like you find out about hunger somewhere else and you're like, people shouldn't be hungry, so we should solve that. And then then you devote your life to trying to fix it. And then, you become an activist, you do your research, you go and join an organization. And then you find out something like, oh, that organization that you thought was going to help solve world hunger, it's being used as a political pawn between like two nation states or something like that, right? Like, then you're like, oh fuck, like my life's work is being kind of like roadblocked by this other thing that like I'm like old now. I'm in my 50s or something. I have kids and I don't have time to now go and study how I'm going to solve that problem, which if I try to do that, I'll probably find another problem. Like, there's
Right.
like people encounter that kind of thing and it tends to demoralize them, I find, like when I meet people. And the challenge is, again, I'm just a guy, so I don't speak with authority on this, but just from my reading and my talking with people, I think the challenge is really to kind of stay optimistic about figuring stuff out. And like, yeah, none of us is gonna single-handedly kind of save the world, but like you can, it's a collaborative effort over a long period of time, and you can make important and valuable contributions that will be appreciated even if they aren't kind of immediately acted upon. And there is a grief, I find. I don't know if that's too dark, but like there is a grief associated with discovering that the world is not going to, I mean, and it might, that's the crazy thing. So it's not like, oh, like you thought the world was gonna be like respond to your heroic attempts and fix itself, and then it's not like, oh, then that the reality is that we can't do anything. That's not true either, because like great things happen all the time. Like progress is real and it happens. So it's like there's my ex-boss told me that the hardest thing in the world is managing your own psychology. Everything else is just moving levers, which is true in a sense. Like if you're gonna persist at something, whether you're gonna work on a new theory of nuclear fusion or whether you're gonna try to fix cancer or whatever, it's like all of the work that you can do is all of the work you can do. Like you do your best and that's all you can do. But like managing your psychology as you're doing it, like, so within the context of your internal experience, like that is like the hard problem in a way. Like once you solve that, or like you may never completely solve it, but once you kind of have a pretty good you're in a pretty good place with how you deal with it, then you can like throw yourself at the most difficult problems, and you may make some dent, you may not make a great dent, maybe you just do the best you can, and then like at the end of your life you feel like you've had a good life. I think that's like, if more people were able to do that, then we have more people throwing themselves at hard problems together collaboratively, then we're actually likelier to solve those problems, right? So that's kind of that's my, I don't even know how we got here, but it's a thing that
I completely, I don't know either, but I completely agree that like having a good internal state with which to like interact with the world and learn about things and try to solve problems through is like the only way that you're going to be able to actually solve those problems and like persist over a long period of time.
Right. It's always tragic when I find people who like, they get super excited about a thing, and like I don't want to I never want to discourage anybody who's excited about anything, but sometimes you see someone who's like almost a little bit too excited, and then you know that they're gonna be disappointed, and you don't wanna get in their way, but you don't wanna, like I'm conflicted about that. But like and then when they hit their like first major disappointment, they quit. And I'm like, like you had all that excitement, and then it's like you need to be a bit more, equanimous, right? You need to have a longer view, be willing to accept that, you're probably going to fail a bunch of times, and it's just that
I
itself
think,
is
I'm similar in that, where I have like kind of upward spirals in my mind, and I'm like, oh, I've got this thing, and then that this thing, and then that could like literally cure cancer and the end of the world, right. And I'll do this and that, whatever. Yeah. And then I get so excited about it, even though I know on some level it's not actually going to pan out that way, because that's not how things work. Right. And then if then one little thing that would have led to that could fall apart, then it can be detrimental to that state of mind, and then it goes the other way. And then you're like, that won't happen, and so you can go in this kind of downward spiral.
Yeah.
And I think learning to manage that, which I feel like I finally started to do a few years back, has actually been like, and learning to just tread that middle ground and like maybe still experience an excitement of an upward spiral, but like stay in the middle and just kind of watch it and know that it's not going to happen, but that that's one possibility.
Yeah.
And I think managing that kind of perfectionism is really important if you're ever going to do anything in the long term.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, I think part of why it's interesting to examine. I don't know how meta you want to get, but like it's interesting even just I like to have these conversations. Right, I like to have these conversations with internet friends and stuff. Like I really like not planning them too much, because it's nice to see where the conversation goes when you don't have a plan, and then it kind of reveals something to you, like what you're like. So I didn't know that we would be talking about this, right? But it's interesting that it reveals to me that this is something that I care about, that I didn't know that it was. I mean, I know to a better degree now. So like if you had asked me what you thought we were going to talk about, I wouldn't have said this. But like it's nice to know that. I mean, I it's too soon for me to know what I know from this, but it's interesting. I have a kind of personal question, I guess, which is like, how do you feel about your, what's like your peer group like in relation to these interests that you have? Because a lot of my online friends tend to be a little bit alien or isolated relative to their peer group. But if I remember correctly, you work in like a research context, so I'm guessing you have fellow nerds.
I do. Yeah, I do artificial intelligence research, and so I'm kind of lucky in that I love thinking about these kinds of questions, and that allows me to do so even on a daily basis, thinking about what is knowledge, can we build that, what is this a thing that, like, how did it evolve, and so it's really nice to be able to get that not out of the way, but like to have that outlet to be able to do that in, and then also my free time if I want to explore. But then I like we were talking about at the beginning, I think having grounding influences is also super important to like, and so a lot of the people that I'm really close with in real life and outside of work and stuff don't think about these kind of things, or we don't talk about them all the time. We kind of talk about, I guess, what some people might say more like mundane human things, but like that are actually like, I don't know, more of experiencing and living life and talking about, social dynamics or what want to have, like cooking, or I don't know, just more like everyday life things. And I actually really like that it's kind of set up that way. I find it really nice.
That is nice. It's how old are you again? You're
23.
That you strike me as a very well adjusted 23-year-old. I remember when I was 23, and like my friend, so when I was 23, I had just started work and I was overwhelmed as hell. I was like, and like my friends were all, I guess everyone was just kind of all over the place. Like none of us knew what we were doing. I mean, that stuff gets kind of fractal. Like, you can talk to a bunch of adults in their 40s and they'll also tell you that they don't know what they're doing. But I feel like while that will always be true, because you're always, no matter how much you know, you're always aware of the boundaries of what you don't know. But it gives me hope in a way. I mean, it encourages me to witness that young nerds, right? Like, and I use the word nerd as a term of endearment. Like, to me, a nerd, I consider myself a nerd. I would say a nerd is anybody who's kind of allows their curiosity to direct their behavior, right? And it's very gratifying to witness young nerds being able to find each other and to find older nerds and connect with them. And like, so it's always been possible, but I feel like it's more possible now than before. And that's just, I'm happy for you, I guess I'm trying to say. It's cool. It's nourishing for me to witness a younger person kind of, and I say a younger person like I'm some old guy. I'm 29, so it's not like I'm an old man. But I do find that it's very nourishing to witness. So it's like, for me, in my head, I can think of this as, this is one way in which the world has gotten better on some front that I care about. And it's such a small, again, it's the managing your psychology thing, right? Like, it might not be, like, I don't know what the broadest trends are in terms of, like, like, the world could be worse in a bunch of ways, but like, by choosing to hold on to the idea that, even if everything else is worse on some fronts, like, I believe that for some young nerds like myself, or who remind me of myself or whatever, like, life is better for them. Like, that can motivate me to, all right, I'm gonna, like, even if I feel kind of grumpy or whatever, I'm gonna try and help make the ground softer for those people, which is fun. It's
Yeah, no, I think that's what's so fun about like the online kind of community, and that you can like opt in whenever you want to, and participate in like these kind of discussions, and then
yeah.
also just structure your life in the way that you want to, and have that, not control, but like ability to do that. I also think with what you're talking about with being like, I don't know, managing your mental model and things like that, I think the big wave of popularizing like mindfulness and meditation actually is
Yes,
having like
I agree.
on people. And I know that people like sometimes make fun of it in the way of like, oh, it's the in thing.
Yeah.
But I think that had I not discovered meditation and things like that a few years back, I would definitely still be experiencing a lot of like the stress spirals and the perfectionism and everything that I am like naturally inclined to do.
Right.
And I like attribute that so much to like how much I enjoy my life now, and just letting things happen, letting go a little bit, and watching it, and being excited and curious and like compassionate about watching it and watching it unfold in myself and other people.
So you were getting into meditation when you were like 19 and 20 ish.
Yeah, I guess 2017.
20.
So yeah, 20, I think.
That's awesome. That is we should really, as a global culture, make that more accessible to more people, because it really, I don't think I was always kind of vaguely curious / interested in it, but it never spoke to me properly until, I don't know, I've always kind of had a adjacent interest in it slightly, but like I think only in the past maybe 3 or 4 years it's not like, so even now it's not like I have a meditation practice. I have like a deep breathing exercise thing that I do regularly that helps, that's kind of meditative, and I journal a lot, which is also kind of meditative. But just I think more broadly, like the idea of so mindfulness is one thing, restfulness is another thing. Like, so the thing that's been blowing my mind recently is kind of understanding how deep breathing affects like the hormone cascades in your body. Like, are you familiar? So it's like, when you get stressed, you have cortisol levels go up in your bloodstream, and you have adrenaline, and then it's like all the things that happen. You then have all these chronic stress symptoms that result, like in the long term, that like messes up with your health. But even in the short term, it just affects your day-to-day experience, your stress spirals and stuff. And you can actually literally like dampen it by doing deep breathing, and then that it triggers your rest and relax kind of parasympathetic nervous system. And I mean, the details aside, like, just the real, like, doing deep breathing made me feel like I was playing a video game, and I didn't know that there was a button that you could press that would fix stuff, like a repair button or a rest button.
I feel like these exercises are like meditation and deep breathing exercises and things like that are not like special in themselves. Like, that's not the goal of them, is not those exercises. It's a shortcut to recognizing like the perspectives. So you can, like, I feel like most people, if they don't go through something like that, or go through really difficult events at early ages,
Mm-hmm.
and you just live like a very normal life, then by the time you're in your 50s and 60s, then I feel like people can have that wisdom just through experiences and just through seeing things ebb and flow in their own life,
Right.
over that extended period of time. But I think what meditation and like breathing exercises that can calm you down and can like affect your mental state, and you can see how that works very explicitly.
Yeah.
It's a shortcut to getting to
Yeah.
that kind of perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Very much so. And yeah, it's wild that, I mean, so I've, there's a thing that happens where when you start like, so the cliche saying is like, when the student is ready, the teacher will show up. And similarly, it's like when you start to get something, like something just makes sense for you and it clicks for you, like, the thing that I always think about is like, why didn't anyone tell me this? And then when I, like, that's just the thought that I have it, and then I actually reflect. I'm like, oh yeah, there have been people who have told me over the years, but I wasn't really paying
yeah,
attention. I wasn't really listening. So for example, one of my so when I was growing up, I didn't like travel because I was always traveling with my family, and my family is not fun to travel with. They get very stressed, and they get like, it's just chaos. And my girlfriend, who's now my wife, she loves to travel, and she would always try to get me to travel. She'd be like, you should travel, let's travel together. I'm like, maybe, like, I had a distaste for it, I guess, and I didn't know why. I didn't realize that my experiences were negative, and I had this like connotation in my head where I just don't want to think about it, because every time I've had anything to do with travel, it was unpleasant for me, and so I don't want to travel. And then so we had a couple of small like trips together, me and my wife and me and one of my friends once. And then like last year I went so from Singapore I went to San Francisco, which is for me, like, so before that all my travels were kind of like regionally in the area, so like Singapore to Malaysia, Thailand, like it's all still mostly Southeast Asia and India. So the world is still mostly the same. Everyone's still kind of familiar, and like, nothing is like, so even the small changes were interesting. And I remember journaling like, oh wow, I should get out more, right? And experience the difference of what a different place is like. And then last year I traveled to San Francisco. My friends invited me over, and then I stayed with them, and it was like such a amazing experience for me, like, for many reasons, not just so it's not necessarily that place is so special, but it's just kind of, it was my first solo trip anywhere by myself. And just the experience was so kind of it's, and like, I find that when I talk about this, I find myself trying to be careful not to speak in cliches and hyperbole, like, oh my god, it changed my life. But it did change my life to some degree, like it gave me a new frame of reference for, like, just, and it's hard to pinpoint a single thing. And I talk about this with the context of books as well. Like, very often people, when they talk about books, they summarize it as, oh, what are the takeaways, what did you learn? And then they're like, oh, this fact, this sentence, this quote. But really, the best thing about a good book, in my opinion, is not any single specific thing that the author says, but it's their way of seeing. It's their vibe. It's like, like Richard Feynman and Alan Watts and Deutsch as well. They all have this very cheeky, playful energy. And even if they could be talking about something completely different than their subject matter, they could be talking about cooking maybe, and they just have this vibe that reminds you that you can be playful. And if you're not being playful,
yeah,
that makes you, oh, I could be more playful. Or like, like just different books, like some memoirs, and they get really intimate and vulnerable and honest, and then you're like, oh, I could be intimate and vulnerable and honest. Like, you don't realize that that's an option. And it's hard to reduce that to, oh, in chapter 1 they say this, chapter 2 they say that. And it's the same thing for me for traveling. And then when that happened, I'm like, oh shit, like, so my first thought was, why has nobody told me that? And I'm like, of course people have been telling me that. And then
and
I
your
go
wife
back.
and they're like, oh, I was
Yeah,
telling you this.
yeah, and then I actually go back and look up, like, so when I was at work, one of my manager, Dave, he was born in the Philippines, raised in Canada, and then he worked in China for a while. He worked in Korea for a while, and like very early on, like in one of our meetings, like he told me, Visa, like you are 20. At the time I was like, what, 24, 25. So you're 25. You're young. You should travel as much as you can and live somewhere else if you can while you can. And I was like, oh yeah, that sounds cool, thanks. And now I'm like, Dave, what else should I know? Tell me, tell me now. I didn't listen the first time, right? And it's remarkable how again, it's like, I think very often people have this 1 to 10 scale in their head of like, how good is a movie? Oh, 1 to 10. How important is this thing? 1 to 10. Like, just loosely, there's a sense of things are, slightly important, very important, super, like, it a kind of linear um
Sure.
sense of. But in practice, again, I don't know if this is, when thinking about this in the light of theory versus practice, or like, modeling versus how good your models is or whatever. But like, in practice, like, the most important, and like, it's like almost an exponential scale. Like, the real, if you look back on your own life and you look at your the best experiences, or like the most important things that happen, it's not like 10% more or less than the next thing. It can be like multiple times the next thing, right? Which I find is something that makes me recalibrate my intuition in a way, and it makes life more exciting, actually, when you realize that, like, a single interaction or a single event can be something that potentially is worth way more than anything else you have considered so far. I find
Yeah.
that makes life exciting. It's like,
Well, it makes you put more focus on like the opportunities that could be available to you at any given moment, and
yeah,
like it's just about whether you take them or not, or which ones you
yeah.
take, and so
But
it's kind of more like a game.
yeah, it's almost creepy how it can be self-fulfilling, because if you don't believe that that's possible, if you don't believe that an opportunity could come and, like, change everything for you, like, so it's like, a question I like to ask people is kind of like, do you allow life to surprise you? Because it's possible to not. That's the crazy thing. I mean, so some things, like when there's a pandemic happening, like, you have no choice, like it consumes everything and you didn't have a choice in the matter. But there will be things like, someone comes along and asks you, do you want to go to a poetry recital? I don't know, just something kind of surprising. And then you're like, I'm not a person who listens to poetry. I don't care about poetry. And so in that
Yeah.
space, you have this model of how you are and what life is. And here comes this kind of invitation from the world to try something different, or like that's outside of your model. And you're like, poetry is not important to me. Like, I'm a scientist or whatever, right? And you never know, you might have like learned something or experienced something there that would have blown your mind. But because you were close to the possibility, then it becomes like a self-fulfilling thing, where because you were not open to being surprised and challenged, then you didn't allow anything to surprise or challenge you, and then life seems unsurprising and unchallenging. Like,
Well, and then even on like a more concrete level, like if you are always saying like kind of no to opportunities, and like always saying like, oh no, I've already got kind of my mental model, I've already got how my life is, then like those channels will become fewer and far between, where people who are, if you always shut someone down when they're
right.
asking you, hey, do you want to go to this poetry thing or this whatever, then eventually they're just going to stop asking you.
Yeah.
I feel like there's like concrete ways in which that is a self-fulfilling thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, I feel like sometimes when people talk about like, oh, life is a self-fulfilling prophecy and it's all about your mental model and it's all about this, a lot of people will write it off as like, oh, it's just all this woo-woo, like just secret and positive attitude, whatever. But it actually manifests in really like understandable and concrete ways. And I feel like understanding that, I don't know. But yeah, because you never know if opportunities will lead to other opportunities, and they more often will than won't.
Yeah.
If you're just open to learning new things, and to the process of like evolving your own worldview.
I don't know if it's more often won't than will than won't, but like even if it's not. So in my
Can I make a statement?
yeah.
I didn't mean that each opportunity is more likely to lead to opportunities than will not. But if you're open to taking opportunities, then more of like it's more likely that taking opportunities will lead to more opportunities than not taking opportunities.
Oh yeah. So my frame is my frame has been kind of like, I was, and especially, so even if the context of like Twitter, right, just Twitter alone, like my frame was, I'm so desperate. Well, I wouldn't say I was desperate, but like internally, I was so desperate for like good conversation with people that, and you know, to me that was obvious. And when I talk to people, it surprises me sometimes that it's not obvious to them. But I guess it's just something about, I don't know. I don't know if it's my personality or my backstory or my books I've read or something. But like, I was always like been like, it's in my head, it's very obviously it's worth talking to 100 people if 99 of them are like, you know, not worth your time, but the 100th person becomes like a true friend, like a real person that you really care about. Because then that relationship, like when you add it to your well, I say social graph. Some people find that kind of if like mechanical or whatever, but like just when you now have that one true friend, they may have a few other people that they find to be like, you know, true friend-ish, like fellow nerds or fellow like people with the same interests or complementary. And like 0 to 1 is the hardest. Like the first friend is the hardest to get. And then once you've had the first one, then you can talk to all of their friends, and the odds of one of their friends being another true friend is like way higher. And then you repeat that process, and then you do that. So for like it can take like so it can take years sometimes for some people to find the first like 10 people. Like it's just because maybe you're in a difficult environment or whatever. But like I believe that I am like a living proof that if you just persist for a few years, 5 years, 10 years, like eventually you get to the point where like you develop a reputation, I guess, for being that person who does that. And then people start like funneling when a random person that you don't know starts asking someone else, hey, like where do I find a nerd who cares about these open questions? And then they'll be like, oh, I know a person who knows a person. And then and then people start saying, and then you get the privilege of new people who've never heard of you before. I mean, who don't know your backstory. They come along and be like, oh, you're so lucky you have like this amazing network. Like, no, bitch,
just overnight.
I built it one by one, slowly. But yeah,
That's true of everything, though, not just people and like social graphs, but also
right.
like you could make an argument for like learning a useful piece of knowledge as well.
Yeah,
And
it
like
compounds.
yeah, compounds exactly, or pretty much like any like taking opportunities and things like that. Like if all of your opportunities end up being like not that useful, but one of them is, you know, a doorway to something, and then people see you as a person who has, you know, good opportunity, or who has good experience or something like that because of that one opportunity, then you're more likely to get more, and so that kind of compounds as well.
Right. So it's 7:20 where I am. So my wife is gonna want me to get dinner soon. So
Yes.
shall we? Yeah, shall we start? So usually when I'm wrapping up, I would ask, is there anything you wanna plug? Anything you wanna to tell people to do?
Check out some mindfulness practices
Ooh.
if you don't already, and you feel like you're struggling a bit in your mental well-being. I feel like
What are
really
your
good.
favorite? What are like your favorite paths or your favorite touch points?
So I'm pretty basic in that I just used Headspace from the
That's.
beginning.
Mm-hmm.
App, and I really, really liked it, and I feel like it teaches you in a very approachable way, and it starts you small and kind of teaches you what it's for and how to approach it.
Nice.
And so I think that would be probably one of the things, and then that, and also learn as much as you can, because I feel like that's what I love to do.
That's so funny. It's like our 1 hour plus conversation. It's a preamble to a Headspace ad. Brought to you by
or your average choice, or your just sit in silence. I was too scared to do that at first, but now that's what I do. Is I just sit in silence and watch things go by.
That's cool. Right. I guess I'll end the recording here. Thanks,
Okay.
Kate, for hanging out. And
and
friends who should follow Kate on Twitter. I'll post your handle in the bio in my description. And yeah, thanks for chatting.
Yeah, thanks. You have a good evening, good dinner.
You too. I mean,
Bye.
it's like, what time is it
Okay,
there? It's
go
like,
bed.
have a
12.
good day.
Yeah.